already when I was 10 years and 11 years, I was walking sometimes by myself in this direction towards the mountain. Already then, I looked upon this mountain as a kind of benevolent, great father. So I somehow interpreted it as equanimity, that far inside here it's completely not harmony is too strong word, but at least you are in balance. There's a balance inside here, and this big mountain, this great mountain, I mean, seems to be such an entity. So it was alive for me. And therefore I decided the best thing would be to live either on top of the mountain or on further down on the mountain itself. Perhaps people coming from other countries visiting Tvergastein think that there are many huts privately owned on this level, but there's nobody else. It's the highest privately owned hut. What you have higher is meteorological stations, etc. But the highest hut in the Nordic countries of Europe. Nothing like it, and there are good reason for it because of the climate. I mean, why should you have an Arctic climate? I mean, good. But it is Hallingskarvet that I'm for. It's not the Arctic climate. It's Hallingskarvet. I'm obeying the urge of Hallingskarvet to come.
But the impression he made was of someone vastly more alive than the average person, far more joyful, and in fact very similar to the Tibetan people that I had lived with in the Himalayas. There was a similarity, and I think it has to do with that deep connection to the natural world.
And so when you meet Arne in person, there's a kind of playfulness that you also see, that I see in a lot of Zen teachers, playfulness, and his playing with language, his playing with words, and his ability to engage in a kind of dance with deep ecology.
Dance?
Yes, I would say very much a dance that he has with deep ecology, with playing with the trees, with the flowers, and with the ideas. So there's a kind of serious lightness, which sounds paradoxical, but it's a serious lightness to his whole presentation, his whole being, the way he presents his being.
And what has always impressed me very deeply about Arne is the combination of innocence with extreme brilliance of the mind. Usually you get intelligent people becoming partly arrogant, partly self-centered, but they just lose the spirit of freedom in themselves as a person. And Arne has always maintained it. Yeah? He is so childlike in his enjoyment of every moment of life.
Well, of course, people think it's very strange how a mountain could be a father, but not to me at all, because very soon I saw that humans live in symbols. So much of their life really in terms of symbols. And that the mountain is just minerals. That no culture, no old culture has looked at the mountain as minerals. On the contrary, they have always looked at very strong symbols. For instance, the contact between the earthly life and heaven. And gods are very rarely thought of to live anywhere. They live in heaven, or they live on top of mountains, or are mountains. So some mountains are holy in so many cultures, and you speak to them, you ask them for good advice, and so on. Only a mountain can get me that view, this fantastic horizon, and where you feel also powerful at the same time as you are very, very small. And that's important philosophically, that the less you are in relation to your surroundings, the stars and the mountains, the more you intensely feel that you somehow symbolically get part of it. You get greater, you get on par with it, you get feel good with it. So the more tiny you are, the more, in some sense, you are together with something great, and therefore get something of that greatness. The term deep ecology, or better, to be a supporter of a deep ecology movement, that's a long term, but it's more basic. That is to join in activism to get rid of the ecological crisis, to join on the basis of your life philosophy or religion. That's to say, your motivation comes from your total view or your philosophical or religious opinions, so that you feel when you are working in favor of free nature, you are working for something in yourself that demands changes, and so you are motivated from what I call the deeper premises. You go all the way back. If we ask you, why do you do this? Why? The supporters of deep ecology movement do not stop with, for instance, it's bad for the health. When you have such pollution, it's bad for this, bad for that. You do not talk so much about pragmatic, what you call pragmatic goals, as that it cannot be done. We cannot live as we do. It's against my deepest concern for myself, as well as for nature itself. And these supporters then have a job to do together with others, which we call then mostly the reformist people, who say this is what's going on in order to overcome the crisis has to do with practical things, technology and other things, and you need not go back to your own philosophy or your own religion. That's unnecessary. So it is those who go all the way back to what I call the ultimate premises, they are generally in favor of very harsh policies that seem to make a lot of trouble for you, but they say, if it's necessary, and no car. If it's necessary, I will not go by airplane in my vacations. I will not so and so, and I need now such and such project which require a lot of energy or to be made. So it flows from their inclination to live in a way that is universalizable.
Deep, long-range ecology movement, deconstructing those phrases, first of all, it is a movement. It is a social movement. It is not an ideology. It is not a specific church. It's not a specific religion. It is a social movement. Social meaning people working together in community. It is based upon ecology, the relationship between organisms and their habitat. It is long range because it does not attempt in this movement to discount the future, but to take in account potentialities and possibilities of evolution of the system. And it is deep in that it encourages participants to ask questions of why. Most importantly, why am I here? What is meaning? So the movement, deep long-range ecology movement, is, if we're basically a search for meaning in a world of fact.
Another word that we use for shallow environmentalism is reform environmentalism. Instead of a radical change in society, they're merely trying to reform society ecologically. I think sustainable development, the concept of sustainable development, is a good example of what we would call shallow environmentalism, because the idea is that the development won't stop. We're going to continue to develop. We just want to develop sustainably or ecologically. Now, as long as you've got this tremendous society that's causing so much ecological problem, you've got to have the reform environmentalists. You've got to pass the laws. You've got to take steps. And without the shallow environmentalists, I think we would have lost just about everything by now. So we're very indebted to this type of work that the reform environmentalists are doing. It's absolutely crucial. The deep ecology point is that it's not enough. We've got to go beyond that and start making fundamental changes in society.
To me, the essence of deep ecology is moving beyond a type of environmentalism which is still based on a highly reductionist and a highly distant approach to the living world, to the natural world. To me, the essence of deep ecology is an expression of the need to develop our deep spiritual and both spiritual, intellectual, and physical connection to the living world around us, to the cosmos. That's, for me, the essence of deep ecology.
Næss would say that people who are working in what's now referred to as the reform environmental approach, Næss would say we all should work together and collaborate, and we should encourage people who are working from what people refer to now as a more reform-based approach to be looking at more fundamental questions. That when one decides that, say, recycling or energy efficiency improvements or certain improvements with respect to farming are enough, they may not be enough, because even organic farming could encroach upon wilderness areas. Or when you're recycling, you're actually, taking a consumer-based product and then trying to reuse certain elements. But maybe it makes sense to not even think about using that product in the first place. So Næss would always argue that we need to engage more fully in terms of questioning all of our actions in life from this deep questioning perspective.
the relation between ecology and philosophy has to do also with this concept of spontaneous experience, because people would, for instance, say, we make a road now through this forest, and it's through the center of the forest, but the square meters of this road is tremendously small, the square meters of it. But then I would say it goes through the heart of this forest. And they say the heart of the forest, that's nonsense. We have a road here, and it's so small part of the forest that it makes no difference. So the spontaneous experience, when you get into the forest deeper and deeper, you have this feeling of being deep in the forest. And if you then hit the road, this completely disappear. And then people say, well, that's your imagination. You see the heart, there's no heart here. But if you start this way and saying there's no heart, it's just at certain distances, you get into a worldview which resembles that of Immanuel Kant, the great philosopher, where you end up saying the nature is without colors, even without shapes, and even without cause and effect, because relation of cause and effect is something created by humans. So there's nothing there. In short, there is nothing in nature in itself. You have no access to nature in itself. You see, you end up in complete nonsense. And that's what many people do who are in philosophy. Even in contemporary so-called postmodernism, nature is something, only a limiting thing which you never can really see or appreciate. You appreciate only your own ways of thinking and feeling. And you are completely determined by your culture and so on. So this protection of nature is a sham in a sense that there is something there, but you don't have any access to it. So it's undermining, for some people, the belief in protection of nature as a vast undertaking for the next century.
One of the main messages that the ecological perspective brought to us in the 1960s was that we have to, we see the landscape, the animals, humans, everything as interrelatedness, as interrelated. There's been a tendency in Western culture to see things as isolated entities. You know, this person, this rock, they're all separate. Eastern thought has Zen Buddhism and so on. One of the legacies of Zen Buddhism when it was introduced into America was to see things in terms of process and interrelatedness. So the deep ecology movement is, you can't just focus on protecting the panda or the elephant over here, the Siberian tiger, or this particular type of endangered flower, because the whole thing is interrelated. You have to look at ecosystems, and we're trying to protect ecosystems and landscapes. Arne Næss provides a philosophical basis for that in terms of what he calls Gestalt thinking, the Gestalt ontology and Gestalt perception. Because again, the typical Western reductionist way of looking at things is in terms of isolated entities, the tree, the rock. Gestalt thinking, or Gestalt perception, is a perception of interrelatedness, where we see, we look at a landscape and we see the tree in relation to the grass, in relation to the animals. And it's a perception of the whole, so to speak.
There's a mountain in southern Norway which has been used as an object for artists to paint. And it's quite clear that many artists or non-artists find that the shape is that of a troll, a big fellow. Trees are the hair, and Gestalt thinking is such that this spontaneous perception of a troll is completely on pair, is completely as adequate description of reality as somebody saying it's a heap of stones. And the Gestalt, of course, is then not only the shape of a troll, but also the being as a troll. You get then all the mythology about trolls into what you see. What you see is tremendously complex, culturally complex thing. When I talk about so much about Gestalt, it's because I have this opinion that science, and I think especially about natural science, only assert something about the abstract relations in reality, not about the content of reality. The content of reality you get directly through spontaneous experience. Well, children are more spontaneous in the sense that reflection and conventional views of things do not yet play such an enormous role. So if we could be able to see a little more like children, we would gain very much, but that's a very difficult redevelopment to get into this state of children's inner life. Well, I try to get the water from the top of the mountain, disappearing there, and then you have a source coming up again there, and I have then channels. And when it is quite flat like this, I don't destroy anything by erosion. And you see here, I try to make it flow all the way to the neighborhood, which is absolutely unnecessary, but it's so amusing. It's very amusing to be an engineer also.
A lot of people say it's very tiny flowers. What's so special about it?
Yes, because they are accustomed to this tremendous big, unnecessarily big tulips and so on. That's nothing for me. If you have been here some weeks to go and look at those tulips, oh, unnecessary, just material. But the soul, the interior life of the flowers are just as intense here as down in the cities. And here you have the contrast between the mineral kingdom and the flower kingdom. The contrast is so inspiring. This one here, for instance, is nothing, it's lacking nothing. It has no soil, practically no soil, but having a good time. I like to see Arne Næss. That's one of the most beautiful flowers here. It's said in the botany, you say that it's like this. And here, it's maybe this small. And you have to go all the way down. And then you see it's flowering, blooming, like this. So.
You spent a lot of time writing here?
Yeah, it's between 10 and 15 books sitting in this. It doesn't disturb when you look out for some time and then you write something, you look out, and this horizon cannot disturb you, and the wind cannot disturb you. I don't think so.
Now, Næss, in following the Buddhist tradition and Gandhi, talks in terms of spiritual development or psychological development of the individual. So Næss went back through Kant's works and found that Kant talked about what he called a beautiful act and what he called a moral act. Of course, Kant himself was primarily an ethical theorist, so that an act was moral for Kant if it accorded with your duty. These are ethical terms, duties and obligations and so on. So you had a duty and obligation to do something, and normally these would go against your inclination, what it is you wanted to do. So that a moral act was an act which was in accordance with your moral or ethical duty, and it ran against what you wanted to do, against your inclinations. Now, what Næss has tried to do is to shift the whole ground away from ethics as we normally understand it in the Western ethical tradition or Western philosophical tradition, and move more over to what's called ontology, or the nature of reality, so that that becomes the ground. Now, through spiritual development or psychological development, as we move away from the ego, and then we start to identify with other humans, and then we identify with animals and plants in the ecosystems, when we actually identify with them, this becomes part of our being. We see ourselves in these other creatures, or in humans and so on. Then this shifts it over to ontology. Now, a beautiful act for Kant is an act where we act with our inclinations. So it's what we want to do. So we want to protect the animals. We're not acting against our inclinations. And so Næss then says, okay, what we want to promote are beautiful acts as opposed to moral acts. So if our personality, our psychology is changed, then we'll want to do these things. So they won't be a moral act, they'll be a beautiful act. They'll be coming out of our inclination, what it is that we want to do.
Well, to me, self-realization is realizing ourselves as a part of an intricate web of living relationships. And I believe that to be, as it were, our true selves. I believe that many ancient traditions have taught that truth. That is the essence at the heart of many spiritual traditions, that we are at one with the cosmos, with the living world. And when we cut ourselves off from that reality, when we allow ourselves to think of ourselves and to live in a way where we feel separated from that, we become frightened little selves. We become very needy of power and control. We feel inadequate, we feel inferior, we feel unseen, unheard, and in that process we become often hungry for power, hungry for control. When, on the other hand, we allow ourselves, and I think it's very important for children to grow up in this way, when we develop a sense of self in relationship to the living world, when we grow up in contact with the animals, with the soil, with the water, with the trees, and more relating to and experiencing that, particularly as part of everyday life, then we realize ourselves as part of something alive, as part of something much bigger than ourselves. And it's a very joyous experience. It's a very positive experience.
The Sami people, they astonished me. One young man there, Sami young man, who was caught by the police standing where they should make a road. It was part of a direct action in favor of the river that should not be used for hydroelectric and dams. And the police, why do you stay here? You're not supposed to stay here. Why do you stay here? Well, this here is part of myself. It was an area of the river where his reindeer were crossing and where he had been since boyhood. And to stay there and to be there, so close connection with his self that he could say, it's part of myself. And that is typical of deep ecology movement that you feel yourself is hurt when they hurt the place with which you identify. You identify with the place that cutting up and destroying them. It's like cutting yourself, and it is cutting yourself because yourself is much more than your ego. The self has to do with that with which you identify.
The part of India that inspires me constantly for my ecological work is in India, where there's such generosity of space. And that generosity shrinks with the robbing of intrinsic value of other species, with defining other species as merely being of value according to how they can bring you better functions for meeting human needs, or profits, even more usually profits, which puts only two options for our relationship with other species. One is dispensability. If they're not useful, push them to extinction. And if you, in the short term, in which use is being determined, don't understand that a whole ecological chain is maintained by this one species that you thought useless, that by declaring a death sentence for it, you have basically, in a way, declared a death sentence for your own conditions for life, because that is so crucial to maintaining life's balance. The second thing is, even for the species that are found of value, you manipulate them, you distort them, you mutilate them, basically using a machine metaphor in your relationship with life, which is, it's not a surprise that we get the mad cow disease. It's not a surprise we get outbreaks of epidemics, because these are consequences of us treating life as if it has no intrinsic worth and no intrinsic organization. It has no intrinsic intelligence.
I think the problem with humanism is its arrogance and its hubris. To say that humans are superior to nature or separate from nature is to deny or defy the laws of ecology. Humans have crossed from the first world of nature into the second world of culture. But to say that it is the destiny of humans to control something that is larger than ourselves, to control a system which is larger than ourselves, is to place humans as basically gods on this planet. The deep long-range ecology movement sees humans as having very unique qualities, very special qualities. There's nothing in the deep long-range ecology movement that is anti-human, that denigrates humans either as individuals or as communities or as a species. The critique of modernism and of humanism in the deep long-range ecology movement is that humanism has confused bigness with greatness. Humanists attempt to develop bigger societies, bigger technology, mega technology, and claim that with bigger technology, humans are becoming greater. Greatness in deep ecology is cultivated through understanding of humility, that humans are plain citizens, in the words of the ecologist Aldo Leopold, plain citizens of natural systems, not lords and masters.
In feeling compassion for the world, for the living world, of course we feel compassion for human beings. In fact, I would say if I have to choose, if sacrificing an insect or a snake to help a human life survive, I would do that. But I, therefore, am not saying that the snake in a fundamental way is less important than the human being, but I think it's quite natural that we feel a greater affinity to human beings. And I think it's very important that we spell out a very clear analysis which makes it clear to people that we are as concerned about human well-being as we are about the well-being of the earth. And they're one and the same. They're inseparable.
So Næss would very much agree that people are different from other animals, and certainly people are different from plants. And because of those differences, because of our ability to be self-aware, because of our ability to use foresight and see the types of problems that we've caused in the past by using hindsight, that we have a responsibility, an obligation to act in a way to respond to the ecological crisis.
I'm gonna get to it come spring of next year. Here's to the river, boy, may it ever flow. Here's to the mountains and the peaks of Idaho. Here's to the miners and the refiners of coal. Here's to the spirit of the air. Well, the bear and the snakes are at home in Hell's Canyon. There is no room for this tired old man. For a service woman to tear down my cabin, I'm gonna fight him just as long as I can. Here's to the river, boy, may it ever be. Here's to the freedom for the likes of you and me. Time to believing now, time I should be part of the spirit of the day.
Arne's work has been deeply inspired by Gandhi, both in his philosophy as well as in his action. As far as the action is concerned, of course, very clearly, it's Gandhi's concept of satyagraha, of non-violent, non-cooperation and direct action that has made made Arne such a pioneer. I remember one of my the first time I heard about Arne was in relationship to this dam that was being built up in northern Norway, where he had chained himself or sat at the bottom of the dam site or done direct action to block the dam. Action very, very directly inspired by Gandhi.
hydroelectric power stations are all over Norway, and then they build big dams. But in Arctic Norway, far north, there was a plan to make a big dam that also would injure the Sami people. So there was a direct action. We stopped the building a road, which was necessary to start. It was summertime, and we didn't reach our goal, and then it was winter time. It's very cold, and that made an impression because we were more than 1,000 people, and it was a very harsh time. But the government sent a big steamer with 600 police to stop us. And according to the deep ecology attitude, you have to be very polite and very nice to people who oppose you. So according to the Gandhian principles, and the Gandhian principles are adopted by deep ecology direct actions, when they come like this to our camp, you see, very angry. Said, please sit down, have some coffee. And I couldn't resist that temptation, and sat down, have a coffee, and they didn't turn around to our position, but they were not opposing us in a violent way or anything like that, you see. The slogan seemed to be very well chosen. It was, let the river live. La elven leve. Norwegian, la elven leve. Let the river live. Marvelous. I don't know who made that slogan, but like fire, that was the thing. Let the river live. We need not electricity. We can have electricity from other places here in Alta. But let the river live, and that is typical deep ecology.
Næss embraces, I think, a very important notion of Gandhi. When Gandhi said, worse than not acting non-violently would be to be a coward. And one of the essential tenets, I think, that motivates, if one could say that there are essential tenets that motivate Næss, is his approach to the environmental crisis as the major crisis facing both society and the world as a larger entity are. And his view there is that it absolutely requires an activeness of the kind that Spinoza sponsored and talked about in his ethics. That one sees the world, and almost in an intuitional sense, one is compelled to react and to respond. Næss has spent over 11 years of his life at this hut. And it's very important, again, when we refer to the hut in the relationship of deep ecology to all of Næss's earlier philosophical work, to remember that Næss hauled up the works of Spinoza, hauled up the works of Gandhi to this hut. And that's where most of his major philosophical works were written. Even while he was teaching at the University of Oslo, he did most of his work at his hut.
This small room is the only room that is so well isolated that in the winter we can have a fairly high temperature, and it's therefore very good to work here. So this is a real room where we live like as if we were in the winter time and Greenland or someplace. Here we really, this is the core of Tvergastein. Here sitting with this contraption here, I have been writing most of my books since 1938. I don't know how many, but many of them, and too many. According to Spinoza, it would be too many, I think.
No, I think that in order to live deep ecology principles, life would not be poorer. On the contrary, when we understand that maintaining and now rebuilding diversity, the living fabric, gives us more, gives us more of everything. It gives us more food to eat, it gives us more building materials, it gives us more options as a global human family. So that it might mean a life that's quite different from the urban consumer lifestyle. But I think at a level which answers most people's needs, their heartfelt needs, people would actually find life richer. And they would find it richer for those spiritual reasons, but also in pure material terms, when it comes to what we really need to survive, which is healthy, fresh food, clean water, clean air, adequate clothing, adequate shelter. Now, for all of those things, we would have more, and we would have greater comfort.
Deep ecological solutions are the only viable solutions to ensuring that every person on this planet has enough food, has enough water, has adequate shelter, has dignity, and has a cultural meaning in life. If we don't follow the path of living in ways that we leave enough space for other species, that paradigm also ensures that most human beings will be denied their right to existence. A system that denies the intrinsic value of other species denies 80% of humanity their right to a dignified survival and a dignified life. It only pretends that it is solving the problems of poverty. It is actually at the root of poverty. And the only real solution to poverty is to embrace the right to life of all on this planet, all humans and all species.
I am, to the astonishment of certain journalists, an optimist. But then I add, I am an optimist about 22nd century, and I say, oh, you mean 21st? No, 22nd century. I think that in 21st century, we have to go through very bad times, and it will hurt even the rich countries. Now it's all sailing smoothly, but it will hurt the rich. So I am a short-range pessimist, long-range optimist. The longer time you use, the more it says, and you'll be communicating more and more the longer. You have all sorts of ways, tiny, tiny ones, and then little bigger and little bigger, and movement this direction, that direction, and with flowing infinite complexity.